Torin stood alone in the dark room aboard his sleek starship, the stars outside glistening like diamonds against the endless void. He was a hunter, known across the galaxy for his skill in tracking down the most dangerous targets. His reputation was legendary, and he had been hired for countless missions over the years. But this one was different. This one felt personal. The Galactic Council had offered a large bounty for the capture or elimination of a giantess, a mysterious creature known as Arca. She had been causing chaos on the distant planet of Verduria, and no one seemed to know why. Some said she was a rogue protector, others claimed she was an ancient weapon gone wild. But whatever the truth, the Council wanted her stopped. Torin glanced at the holographic message that had brought him here. The words flickered in the air before him. Bounty offered for the capture or death of Arca. Verduria. Immediate response required. His heart raced as the message repeated itself. He had never failed a mission, and this one seemed like it would be no different. The Council's bounty was enough to buy his way into any high-class station for the rest of his life, and Torin had never been one to turn down a lucrative job. But as the message continued to play, a strange feeling began to crawl up his spine. The name Arca seemed to trigger something in him, something he couldn't quite place. The thought of the giantess troubled him, but he pushed it aside. He was a hunter. His job was simple: track the target, eliminate or capture it, and collect his reward. The details of the mission didn't matter. Torin stood up, turning to the control panel of his ship. He activated the engines, and the hum of the powerful motors filled the room. His ship, the Vigilance, was fast and deadly, a perfect match for a hunter like him. He had traveled the galaxy for years, jumping from one job to another, each one more dangerous than the last. He had seen it all: alien beasts, rogue guys, rebel leaders, and corporate criminals. But this giantess was something new, something that didn't fit into any category he was familiar with. The journey to Verduria was going to be long, but Torin had made this trip countless times before. As the ship accelerated into hyperspace, the stars outside stretched into streaks of light, and the familiar feeling of weightlessness washed over him. His mind, however, remained focused on the task at hand. Arca was out there, and he needed to find her. The sooner he tracked her down, the sooner he would complete the mission and move on to the next one. But as the days passed in the solitude of his ship, Torin couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this mission. The more he thought about Arca, the more familiar her name felt. He had heard stories, whispers from old travelers, legends passed down from one star system to another. Some of those stories spoke of a race of giant beings that had once protected planets like Verduria, creatures that were as old as the stars themselves. But those were just stories. No one had seen one of them for centuries. Torin shook his head, dismissing the thoughts. He wasn't here to solve mysteries. He was here to complete a job. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Torin's ship dropped out of hyperspace, and the lush green world of Verduria came into view. The planet's twin suns shone brightly, casting a warm glow over the rolling mountains and vast forests. It looked peaceful from a distance, but Torin knew better. He had heard the reports. Arca had been terrorizing the planet, destroying villages and leaving a trail of destruction in her wake. The Galactic Council wanted her stopped, and Torin was the one they trusted to do it. He docked his ship at a remote outpost on the edge of the planet's largest city. The station was quiet, the only sounds coming from the hum of the nearby machinery. Torin stepped out of the ship, adjusting the weight of his gear as he walked toward the control center. There, a contact would provide him with more details about the giantess. Inside the station, the air smelled faintly of metal and machinery. A few workers moved around, their faces tired from long hours in the harsh conditions of Verduria. Torin made his way to a darkened corner, where a man in a dusty coat waited for him. The man, whose name was Fen, was a local who had been hired to help hunters like Torin navigate the planet. "Are you the one who's hunting Arca?" Fen asked, his voice low and cautious. Torin nodded, his gaze fixed on the man. "I am. What can you tell me about her?" Fen glanced around nervously before speaking. "She's not like any creature I've ever seen. Some say she's a remnant of a forgotten civilization. Others say she's the last of her kind. All I know is she's dangerous. You'll need more than just your usual tricks to capture her. She's strong, and she's quick. And she's been hiding out in the mountains to the north." Torin's eyes narrowed. "Tell me where to find her." Fen hesitated. "There's something you should know, though. Some of the locals say they've seen her, in ways that don't make sense. They say she's not just a monster. She has a connection to the planet, like it's part of her." Torin's interest piqued, but he said nothing. The hunt was what mattered. "Where can I find her?" Fen gave him a map of the mountains and pointed to a location deep within the range. "That's where she's been spotted. But be careful, Torin. There's more to her than you think." Torin left the station without another word, his mind racing with the strange warning. He had heard the rumors, but he wasn't one for superstition. Arca was a target, nothing more. Still, as he made his way to the mountains, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this hunt would be unlike any he had faced before. The wind howled through the mountains as Torin made his way toward the heart of the range. His footsteps were quiet against the rocky terrain, and his senses were on high alert. He had hunted creatures far more dangerous than anything he had encountered on this planet. But Arca, she was different. He could feel it in his bones. Torin didn't know it yet, but he was about to uncover a secret that would change everything he thought he knew about himself. The journey from the outpost to the mountains was long, but Torin had no intention of rushing. He preferred the quiet solitude of his own thoughts as he made his way across the rugged terrain. The sky above Verduria was a brilliant shade of orange, with the two suns casting long shadows over the rocky landscape. The planet felt alive, its air thick with mystery, its mountains ancient and untamed. Torin's ship, Vigilance, was built for speed, but the journey through the atmosphere of Verduria had been slow. He had to be careful, cautious. If Arca was truly as dangerous as the reports said, he had to make sure his approach was methodical. Rushing in recklessly would only lead to failure, and failure meant death. It was a lesson Torin had learned early in his career, and it was one he never forgot. As he flew, his thoughts kept returning to the stories he had heard about Arca. The strange whispers from Fen and the locals unsettled him. The idea of a giantess, a creature of such power and mystery, had always seemed like a myth, a bedtime story for children. But the bounty on her head was real. The council didn't deal in fantasies. Torin adjusted the controls on the ship, the sleek craft slicing through the sky with ease. He kept his senses sharp, alert to any movement below. The mountains ahead were distant, towering peaks that seemed to stretch into the heavens. They were wild and untamed, much like the creature he was hunting. For a long time, nothing but the hum of the engines filled the cockpit. Torin thought about his past, about the countless hunts he had been on. He had faced the most terrifying of enemies, space pirates, alien creatures, and rogue airs. But there was something different about this mission. Arca wasn't just another bounty. She wasn't just another creature to be tracked and neutralized. There was something deeper about her, something that Torin couldn't explain. He couldn't help but wonder, was there more to this mission than the council was letting on? Was there something about Arca that he wasn't being told? His mind raced with questions, but for now, all he could do was follow the map Fen had given him and hope it led him to the right place. After hours of flying, Torin finally reached the base of the mountains. The peaks loomed ahead, their jagged edges cutting into the sky. The air here was thinner, and the temperature had dropped significantly. Torin pulled on his jacket, tightening the collar as the cold wind bit at his face. He descended to the landing site, a small clearing nestled between two large cliffs. He climbed out of the cockpit, scanning the area. The forest surrounding the clearing was dense, and the trees towered high above him. The ground was uneven, with rocks and thick vegetation, making it difficult to move quickly. The air smelled earthy, filled with the scent of pine and moss. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, but Torin didn't trust the calm. This was Verduria, a planet that could turn deadly in an instant. Torin adjusted the strap of his weapon, a high-powered energy rifle, and made his way toward the foot of the mountain. His boots crunched softly against the ground, the only sound in the otherwise quiet wilderness. He moved cautiously, eyes scanning the surroundings. He had learned long ago that in places like this, the silence was often the most dangerous part. As he climbed higher, the terrain grew steeper. The path became more treacherous, with loose rocks and narrow ledges that forced him to move carefully. His breath came in shallow gasps as he reached the first of the high cliffs. The view was breathtaking. Below him, the forest stretched for miles, the trees like tiny green specks against the vast landscape. Torin stopped to catch his breath and took a moment to survey the area. He was close now. The location Fen had given him was just ahead. Arca was out there, somewhere in the wilds of these mountains. But where? The stories he had heard painted a picture of a creature that was nearly impossible to track. They spoke of her moving silently through the trees, her footsteps barely leaving a mark on the earth. Some claimed she could vanish into the mist without a trace. The very idea of hunting her felt like trying to catch a shadow. Torin shook his head, pushing those thoughts aside. He wasn't afraid. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. He had hunted much worse than Arca, and he had always come out on top. This would be no different. As he climbed higher, the wind picked up, howling through the mountain passes. Torin reached the next ridge and crouched behind a large rock formation, his sharp eyes scanning the valley below. He saw nothing but trees and distant cliffs, the landscape stretching out in all directions. There was no sign of Arca, no movement. But then he heard it. A low rumble, like thunder in the distance. It wasn't from the sky, though. It was coming from the earth itself. Torin's instincts kicked in. He crouched lower, peering over the edge. In the distance, he saw it, a massive form moving through the trees, her shape almost indistinguishable from the forest itself. Arca was real, and she was close. Torin's heart began to race as he watched her move. She was enormous, towering above the trees, her glowing blue skin visible even in the dim light. Her movements were fluid, almost graceful, despite her size. She didn't seem to be aware of his presence, but Torin knew better than to assume she hadn't noticed him. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for. He was face to face with the creature that had caused so much chaos, so much fear. The bounty was within his reach. But something about her, the way she moved, the way she seemed to blend into the landscape, it unsettled him. Was this really just a simple hunt? Or was there something more going on here, something he couldn't yet understand? Torin slowly drew his weapon, the cool metal of the rifle a comfort in his hands. He had to stay focused. Arca was a threat, and he had a job to do. But as he watched her move through the trees, a strange feeling tugged at his chest, a feeling he couldn't shake. It wasn't fear. It was something else entirely. Torin moved with caution, his steps quiet as he followed the massive form of Arca through the dense forest. The trees here were ancient, their trunks wide and gnarled, their roots twisting into the earth like the fingers of some ancient creature. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, and a low mist hung in the air, blurring the edges of the world. Arca's towering form was still visible, her body outlined against the sky, as she moved gracefully through the trees. Despite her size, she seemed almost like a ghost, silent, elusive, and untouchable. Torin's eyes never left her, his grip tight on the rifle in his hands. He had seen many dangerous creatures in his time as a hunter, but none quite like this. Arca wasn't just big, she was powerful. Every step she took seemed to shake the very ground beneath her, but she didn't seem to notice. Her focus was elsewhere, her movements fluid and almost peaceful. As Torin crept closer, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He paused for a moment, scanning the surroundings, but there was no sign of anyone else. Still, the feeling persisted, a strange, unsettling sense that the planet itself was alive, aware of his presence. Torin took a deep breath and steadied himself. This was it. He was close enough now. He raised his rifle, aiming at Arka's massive figure through the trees. She was unaware of him, her back turned as she moved slowly between the thick trunks of the forest. His pulse quickened. The shot would need to be perfect, swift, and precise. But just as Torin was about to pull the trigger, something unexpected happened. Arka stopped. It was as though she sensed him, as if she knew he was there all along. Her massive head turned slowly, her sharp eyes scanning the forest. Torin froze, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, time seemed to stretch out, and everything in the world grew still. Then, in the softest voice, Arka spoke. "I know you're there." Her voice was deep, resonant, and full of an ancient weight that made Torin's skin prickle. It was not a voice of anger or hostility, but one of quiet recognition. It sent a chill through him, like hearing an echo of a long-forgotten memory. Torin's mind raced. How could she have known? He hadn't made a sound. He hadn't even moved. And yet she had sensed him the moment he approached. He had hunted countless creatures in his time, but none of them had ever been able to sense him like this. Arka's eyes softened, her expression unreadable. She stepped forward, and with each movement, the ground trembled beneath her. Her immense size made her seem otherworldly, yet there was something undeniably human about her as well. Her gaze never wavered from Torin, and the closer she got, the more he realized how small and insignificant he seemed in her presence. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice gentle but filled with an unspoken power. "What do you seek, hunter?" Torin felt his throat dry up. The words he had rehearsed in his head, the reasons for his hunt, suddenly seemed meaningless. This wasn't just some wild beast. This was Arka, the creature that had been the subject of so many stories, so many rumors. He had come to kill or capture her, but now that he stood face to face with her, he wasn't sure what to do. She wasn't the monster he had expected. She wasn't the enemy. She was something else entirely. Torin began, but his words faltered. He had prepared himself for a fierce battle, for a fight to the death. But now that the moment had come, he found himself questioning everything. "I came for the bounty. The Galactic Council. They want you gone." Arka's eyes darkened, but there was no anger in them, only a deep sorrow. "The Council sent you to kill me," she said, as if repeating a fact she had known for a long time. She stepped closer, her towering form casting a shadow over him. "Do they truly believe that killing me will solve anything?" Torin didn't know how to respond. He had always been a hunter, following orders without questioning them. But standing here in front of Arka, something about the mission felt wrong. He had been told she was a threat to the planet, that she was causing destruction, but now he saw nothing but a sorrowful creature, lost and alone. Arka knelt down slowly, her face coming closer to Torin's level. She gazed at him with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom, and Torin felt a sudden, inexplicable connection to her. It was as if she was searching for something inside him, something deep within. "I did not choose this path," Arka said softly. "I was not always like this. I was once a protector, a guardian of this world, long before the Council's bounty hunters came. I was forced to leave my people to protect my child from those who would harm him. I failed him." Torin blinked, his mind racing. Child. What was she talking about? He took a step back, confusion overtaking him. "You're lying," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I have no." But before he could finish, Arka's gaze hardened, and she spoke with an urgency that cut through his thoughts. "No, Torin," she said, her voice firm yet filled with pain. "You do not remember me, but I remember you. I remember the child I was forced to leave behind." Torin's heart skipped a beat, his breath caught in his throat. The world seemed to tilt around him as Arca's words struck him like a thunderclap. "Your name is Torin," Arca continued, her voice quiet but unyielding. "You were just a baby when I had to flee. I left you to protect you, to keep you safe. I had no choice. I never wanted to abandon you, but they would have killed you." Torin staggered back, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. His pulse raced, and his hands trembled as he tried to process what she was saying. She was his mother. Arca reached out, her large hand hovering just above him, as if unsure whether to touch him or not. Her eyes were full of sorrow and regret. "I am sorry, my son," she whispered, the words a soft, mournful plea. "I did what I had to do to keep you safe. But now, it seems I have failed you in another way." Torin couldn't speak. His entire world had just shifted, and the truth of her words hit him harder than any blow he had ever taken. Everything he had believed about his past, his mission, it all felt like a lie now. The hunter had come to kill the giantess, but the giantess was his mother. Torin's mind raced, his thoughts spinning in every direction. The words Arca had spoken echoed in his ears. His mother. She was his mother. The realization hit him like a freight train, knocking the breath out of him. How could it be true? How could he not have known? His hands trembled as he struggled to process it all. Every story he had heard, every piece of information he had gathered on his hunts, it had all been a lie. The bounty, the mission, it had all been built on a foundation of falsehoods. Arca wasn't the monster they had painted her to be. She was his protector, the one who had kept him safe when he was too young to understand. The weight of the truth threatened to crush him. He had spent his entire life as a hunter, tracking down targets, following orders without ever questioning them. But now, standing before the very creature he had been sent to kill, he felt lost. Arca, too, seemed to sense the confusion swirling inside him. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, Torin saw the deep pain that lay hidden within her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't vengeful. She was broken, grieving for the child she had been forced to leave behind, for the years lost, and the things she had done to survive. Torin swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. He had 1,000 questions, but no answers. How could he reconcile what he had been taught with the reality of who Arca was? How could he stand here, rifle in hand, after what she had just revealed? "I didn't want this," Arca said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I never wanted to hurt anyone, least of all you. But the council, they didn't give me a choice. They hunted me. They took everything from me. They made me a monster in their eyes. But I am not a monster. Torin, I am your mother." Torin's throat tightened. The words didn't seem real. He wanted to deny them, wanted to reject this reality that was so foreign to him. But deep down, he couldn't ignore the truth in her voice. The pain, the regret, it all felt too real. He took a shaky step back, his rifle still clenched in his hands. His training, his instincts as a hunter, told him to act, to end the mission, to finish what he had come to do. But his heart, torn between his past and his duty, wouldn't let him. "I was just a child," Torin whispered, the weight of his own confusion settling in his chest. "I don't remember any of this. You left me. You abandoned me." Arca flinched, the guilt in her eyes growing deeper. "I never wanted to leave you, Torin," she said softly, her voice filled with the anguish of the truth. "I had to go. They were coming for you. I couldn't let them take you too." Her massive form seemed to shrink before him, her shoulders slumping with the burden of her words. She wasn't just a giantess. She was a mother, broken and desperate, caught in the web of forces far beyond her control. Torin closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm the storm inside his mind. He had always been taught that his mission was his purpose, that he was a weapon, an instrument of the Council's will. But now, faced with the truth of his origins, he didn't know who he was anymore. He felt like a stranger in his own life. "Why didn't you come for me?" Torin's voice cracked as he asked the question he had always wondered. "Why didn't you come back? I've spent my life wondering why I was left alone. Arca's eyes filled with sorrow. I wanted to, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But I couldn't. They would have found you, Torin. I couldn't risk that. I thought I was protecting you by staying away. I thought if I stayed hidden, you'd be safe. The realization hit him hard. The council didn't just send him to hunt Arca. They had sent him to silence the truth. What now? Torin asked, his voice steadying as he looked up at her. His heart felt heavy, the weight of his past and his present crashing together in a painful moment of clarity. Arca gazed at him, a mixture of hope and sorrow in her eyes. Now, Torin, we fight. We fight for the truth. We fight to protect this world from the council, from those who seek to control it. We fight together, like we should have done all those years ago. Torin hesitated, but something inside him shifted. The hunter inside him, the one who had followed orders without question, started to fade away. In its place, something new was emerging. A sense of purpose, of duty to something greater than just the bounty. For the first time, Torin lowered his rifle. I'm with you, he said, his voice filled with resolve. Let's stop them. The air around them was thick with tension, the weight of their words hanging heavily between Torin and Arca. Torin stood there, his rifle now lowered, his mind still a storm of confusion and realization. Everything he had believed about himself, about his mission, had just shattered into pieces. The hunter had become something else, a man who had just learned the truth about his own flesh and blood. Arca's gaze softened as she saw the conflict in his eyes. She could sense the struggle within him. He had been raised to be a hunter, to follow orders without question, and now everything he knew was being torn apart. He was no longer just a soldier of the council. He was a son, and he was about to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. I know this is hard for you, Torin, Arca said gently, her voice a comforting balm in the midst of his turmoil. I know you've spent your whole life doing what they told you, but now you have a choice to fight for what's right. Torin swallowed, trying to clear the lump in his throat. I don't know how to fight back against them, he admitted. The council is too powerful. They have resources, armies. I've been one of their weapons for years. How can I stand against all of that? Arca's expression hardened, the flicker of the warrior within her rising to the surface. We don't need to fight them head-on, not right away. But we can expose the truth. We can show the people of this world what the council has done. We can break their hold over the galaxy. Torin glanced at the towering figure of his mother, still amazed at how she could be both so gentle and yet so strong. He had seen her as a monster, a giantess who had to be hunted. But now he saw the woman who had protected him when he was a child, who had made impossible choices to keep him safe. She wasn't just a giant. She was a mother, a protector, and she was asking for his help. He looked down at his rifle, the cold metal in his hands. It felt so wrong now. He had been raised to use it, to follow orders and eliminate targets. But now, the very thing that had defined him felt foreign, almost useless. Torin slowly set it down on the ground, the weight of it no longer comforting. I can't fight the way I used to, he said, almost to himself. But I will help you. I will fight with you however I can. Arca nodded, her face softening with pride. I knew you would, Torin. You have more strength in you than you realize. There was no turning back now. Torin had made his decision. The man who had once hunted his mother was now standing beside her, ready to fight the very forces that had turned his life upside down. But the path ahead was uncertain. The council was ruthless, and they wouldn't let them escape without trying to stop them. We need to gather allies, Arca said, her tone turning serious. The people of this world need to know the truth about the council. They need to understand that we are not the enemy, that we've been manipulated and hunted for years. We need to unite them before the council can silence us. Torin nodded, feeling the weight of the task ahead. It was going to be a long, difficult journey. They would need to gather information, find people who were willing to fight back, and do it all without being discovered by the Council's spies. But it was the only way. "We can start by reaching out to the rebels," Torin suggested, thinking back to his time as a hunter. He had tracked down resistance groups before, always as an enemy. But now things had changed. There are pockets of resistance on different planets. We can contact them, tell them what's really happening. Arca's eyes glinted with approval. That's a good place to start. But we'll need to move carefully. The Council has eyes everywhere. One mistake, and they'll know we're alive. They'll send more bounty hunters after us, and we'll be on the run again. Torin looked around at the dense forest, the towering trees, and the mist that curled around them. It felt like a safe haven, but he knew that safety would be fleeting. They couldn't stay here forever. The Council's reach was long, and their enemies were many. But for the first time in a long while, Torin didn't feel alone. He had Arca by his side, and together they had a chance to fight back. "Let's get to work," Torin said, determination building within him. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let the Council dictate his fate any longer. Arca smiled, a rare softness in her expression. "We'll do it together, Torin. We'll fight for this world, for its freedom. And we'll make sure no one else suffers like we have." The decision had been made. There was no turning back. The hunter and the giantess, mother and son, would join forces to tear down the system that had once controlled them. They would fight for the truth, for the people, and for a future free of the Council's tyranny. The path ahead would be long, and the battles would be hard. But Torin felt a new sense of purpose, a new strength he had never known before. The world around him had been built on lies, but together, he and Arca would bring the truth to light. As they began to make their plans, the distant sounds of the forest, birds calling, the wind rustling through the leaves, seemed to offer a quiet reassurance. This was only the beginning. The war was far from over, but with each step they took, they grew stronger. And they would not stop until the Council was defeated and the galaxy was free. The days that followed were filled with planning, a steady stream of actions as Torin and Arca worked to gather allies. The journey ahead was dangerous, but Torin felt a new sense of determination. The world he had known, the life he had lived as a hunter, was slipping away, and in its place, something new was taking root, a purpose, a cause that he could finally believe in. "We need to move carefully," Arca warned, her voice steady as they sat by the campfire. The dark sky above was speckled with stars, a peaceful contrast to the storm of emotions that churned within Torin. "The Council has eyes everywhere, and we can't risk being tracked too soon." Torin nodded, his gaze fixed on the flames that flickered and danced in the night. He had been a hunter, skilled at tracking and staying out of sight. But now, the stakes were higher. They were no longer the ones who hunted. They were the ones being hunted. Their first goal was to contact the rebels. The underground groups that opposed the Council had been scattered across various planets. Arca knew of a few, groups that had been fighting the Council's oppressive rule for years. She had been in hiding for so long, though, that she didn't know exactly where to find them. But there were whispers, messages left behind by the rebels, signals they could follow to get in touch. The plan was simple, yet risky. They would travel from one planet to another, following the trail of the resistance. But every move had to be made in secret, for if the Council discovered them, the fight would be over before it had even begun. The first planet they targeted was Solaris, a world that had seen its fair share of uprisings. It was a place where the Council's influence was strong, but the people had learned to fight back in small ways. The resistance had a foothold there, though it was no longer as powerful as it once was. "We'll need to keep a low profile," Torin said, packing supplies into a small bag. He glanced at Arca, her large form, crouched by the fire, her eyes scanning the horizon. The night was quiet, but Torin knew better than to relax. The council could strike at any moment. Arca nodded, her sharp eyes never leaving the distant landscape. We can't afford to be careless. If we're spotted too soon, the whole planet will be on alert. We can't risk that. The two of them set off early the next morning, their journey taking them through dense forests, over rocky hills, and across fields that stretched far into the distance. It was a long, arduous journey, but Torin didn't mind. Every step brought him closer to something he had never known: a purpose. The planet's capital city, Iltara, was a bustling place filled with both civilians and military personnel. The council's influence was everywhere, and the streets were heavily patrolled. But there was a network of underground tunnels and safe houses that the rebels used to move unseen. The key to finding them lay in knowing which signs to look for: small gestures, a look in the eyes, or even a piece of hidden code etched into the walls. Torin and Arca arrived in the city just as night began to fall, the streets lit by glowing lamplights. They moved through the shadows, keeping to the edges of the city where the lights couldn't reach. They followed a series of carefully planned routes, each step calculated and quiet. Torin's heart beat in his chest, but he kept his composure. He had been trained to move like this, silent, unseen, and undetected. After hours of searching, they found their contact in a small dark alleyway. A man named Rax, a former soldier who had deserted the council, was there linked to the rebellion on Solaris. He had information about the Resistance's movements and could guide them to where they needed to go next. Rax was a wiry man, his face weathered from years of living in hiding. He had a scar running across his cheek, a reminder of his time with the council's forces. When he saw Arca, his eyes widened in surprise, but he didn't say anything right away. Instead, he gave a slow nod, recognizing the Giantess for who she was. "You must be Arca," Rax said, his voice low and cautious. "I never thought I'd see you again." Arca gave a small nod, her expression serious. "It's been a long time, Rax. We need your help." The three of them moved quickly through the dark streets, using back alleys and hidden paths to avoid the eyes of the council's patrols. As they traveled, Rax explained the situation on Solaris. The rebellion was struggling. The council's forces had grown stronger, and many of the rebel cells had been wiped out. The survivors had scattered, their efforts now more fragmented than ever. "But there are still pockets of us," Rax said, "and the people are starting to rise up again. They're tired of the council's control. We just need someone to lead them, to show them that we can fight back." Torin listened intently. He had never seen the rebellion from this side, always having been taught to hunt and destroy. But now, as he heard Rax's words, something shifted within him. He could see the hope in Rax's eyes, the desperate need for someone to step up and lead the fight. It wasn't just about survival, it was about freedom. They reached a hidden safe house, a small building tucked away in a corner of the city. Inside, a handful of rebels were gathered, their faces lit by the soft glow of a single lamp. They looked weary but determined, their eyes filled with the fire of resistance. When they saw Arca, their expressions shifted. They recognized her as a symbol of strength, someone who had fought against the council for years. The meeting was quick but vital. Arca and Rax shared their plans, detailing the need for a united front and how they could strike back against the council. The rebels were hesitant at first, unsure of the risks, but Arca's presence gave them hope. The people of Solaris had been oppressed for so long, and now, with Arca's strength and Torin's knowledge of the council's inner workings, they had a chance. "We'll join you," one of the rebels said. "We can't keep hiding. It's time to take a stand." Torin felt a surge of hope. This was just the beginning, but it was a powerful start. The council might be powerful, but they weren't invincible. Together, with the help of the rebels, they could make a difference. Arca placed a hand on Torin's shoulder, a silent show of support. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, a cause worth fighting for. The journey ahead would be long and dangerous, but he wasn't alone anymore. They were ready. The rebellion on Solaris had begun. With the safe house now a hub of activity, Torin and Arca stood at the heart of it all. The small group of rebels, once scattered and disorganized, were now united by one common goal: to take down the Council and end its reign of terror. Arca felt the weight of leadership pressing down on her. She had never wanted to be the figurehead of a rebellion, but now it seemed like the only way forward. The people were looking to her for guidance, for strength. She had spent years in hiding, avoiding the Council's wrath. But now, standing in front of the gathered rebels, she realized she had a responsibility. Torin, standing beside her, was a symbol of the change that had come to this war. The hunter who had once tracked and hunted down those who opposed the Council was now a part of the resistance. He had been changed by the truth, by the discovery that the very person he had been sent to eliminate was his mother. The realization had shaken him to his core, but it had also ignited a fire within him. He was no longer just a soldier. He was part of something much bigger. The safe house was filled with the low hum of voices as the rebels discussed their next steps. The room was dimly lit by flickering lamps, the air thick with a sense of urgency. Everyone knew that the Council wouldn't sit idle for long. They would soon learn that Arca, the Giantess, was still alive, and they would stop at nothing to destroy her and anyone who stood with her. "We can't waste time," Rax said, his voice steady as he addressed the group. "The Council has spies everywhere, and the longer we stay here, the more likely we are to be found. We need to move quickly, strike before they realize what's happening." Arca nodded, her expression hardening. She knew that Rax was right. They had to act fast, but they also had to be careful. The rebels didn't have the resources to fight the Council head-on. Not yet. They needed to be smart, to gather more support, to weaken the Council's grip on the people before they launched a full-scale attack. "We need to start with the Council's supply lines," Torin suggested. "If we can disrupt their resources, we'll weaken their ability to maintain control. They rely on their supply chains to keep their forces fed and armed. If we hit them where it hurts, we can begin to turn the tide." The rebels listened intently, nodding in agreement. It was a solid plan. Target the Council's logistics and supply routes, create chaos, and make them question their ability to hold on to power. But it wouldn't be easy. The Council's security forces were powerful, and the supply lines were well guarded. Rax stepped forward, his face determined. "I know where we can strike. There's a transport hub outside the city that the Council uses to move supplies. It's heavily guarded, but it's vulnerable. If we can hit it fast and retreat before they can respond, we might just stand a chance." Torin's eyes flicked to Arca, searching her expression. She had seen battle before. She knew the risks. But now she had something to fight for. She had a son beside her, a growing group of rebels, and a future to protect. "We'll do it," Arca said, her voice unwavering. "We hit them at the transport hub, take out their supplies, and get out before they can retaliate. It's risky, but it's the best chance we've got." The room fell into a heavy silence as the rebels absorbed the plan. There were no guarantees, no promises of success. But for the first time, the people of Solaris felt the stirrings of hope. They had a chance to fight back. They had a chance to take control of their future. The next day, the rebels moved out under the cover of darkness. Torin, Arca, and Rax led the group through the city's underground tunnels, moving swiftly and silently to avoid detection. The transport hub was located on the outskirts of Iltara, a heavily guarded complex surrounded by high fences and watchtowers. But the rebels had learned the layout, and they knew exactly when and where to strike. As they approached the hub, the tension in the air was palpable. The night was still, the only sounds being the soft crunch of their boots on the ground and the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. Torin's heart raced, his mind focused. This was the moment. They couldn't afford to fail. The plan was simple: sabotage the supply lines, destroy the transport vehicles, and retreat before the Council could send reinforcements. But even with the element of surprise, they knew the council would be on high alert. They had to be quick. The rebels split into two groups. One would take out the guards at the main entrance, while the other would move to the rear, planting explosives on the transport vehicles. Torin, Arca, and Rax led the rear team, moving swiftly toward the trucks and crates filled with supplies. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the night. Torin's heart clenched, knowing that the first wave of rebels had engaged the guards. Arca worked quickly, her massive hands deftly placing the explosives, while Torin kept watch. The seconds felt like hours, but they remained focused. They had come too far to fail now. With the explosives set, they retreated, moving back into the shadows. The blast rang out in the distance, followed by the sound of chaos as the transport hub erupted in flames. The Council's supply chain had been severely damaged, and the rebels had made their mark. But as they fled into the night, Torin knew this was only the beginning. The Council would retaliate, and the fight would only grow fiercer from here. But for the first time, he felt a deep sense of purpose. He wasn't just a hunter anymore. He was a part of something bigger. He was fighting for freedom, for the truth, for the future. Together with Arca, the rebels, and the growing strength of the resistance, they would continue the fight. The war was far from over, but with each victory, they came closer to the ultimate goal: freedom from the Council's oppressive rule.